The roast remained warm on the platter. The Christmas lights flickered softly from their spot in the corner. My mother arranged the table just as she always had. She laid out linen napkins, silverware from her grandmother, and a centerpiece made of white candles surrounded by cranberries. This dinner was intended to be a peaceful gathering, just the five of us. My father was slicing the meat. Every year my father treated Christmas dinner as if it were a staged event, meticulous and exact. My younger sister absent-mindedly scrolled through her phone and nibbled at a chipped fingernail. She remained mostly silent. Silence was my mother's default whenever she found herself in trouble. I sensed that something was looming. What I didn't expect was for it to arrive so suddenly. My father placed the carving knife on the table, dried his hands with a towel, and then brought his fist down hard onto the table. The wine glasses vibrated from the impact. Our dog started barking from behind the laundry room door. "You either give my younger sister a hand," my father barked, "or get the hell out of this house." The air in the room went motionless. My younger sister didn't lift her eyes. My mother fixated on her wine glass as though some secret message was etched inside. No one uttered a word. In fact, I didn't speak at all. My eyes traveled around the table, to my father, who used to grill me on multiplication in the car, to my mother, who once wove my hair into braids before my very first job interview, and to my younger sister, whom I'd helped cover rent more times than I could recall. Then I rose to my feet. The chair screeched backward over the hardwood floor, sharp as something ripping. I deliberately creased my napkin, placing it gently on the table. I headed for the exit, picked up my jacket, and stepped outside. There were no screams or tears, just a heavy hush. What they didn't realize was that I was leaving behind far more than just this one meal. I was turning my back after 2 decades of being relied upon as the solution, the backup, and the one who handled everyone's finances. I still can't fully comprehend this part. I haven't always kept quiet. There were times when I was the first to volunteer, stepping in before anyone else had a chance to ask for help. I was considered a model child, the reliable one, the person who knew about APR percentages even before graduating high school, who helped my mother and my father manage their accounts online, and the one who drove my younger sister back from Crescent Valley University after her second withdrawal. When my mother overdosed at a motel along US 50, the call from St. Elora Medical Center came for me. I left Camden and Hunt, picked up my younger sister, and held a garbage bag while she was sick as we waited at Northside Health Express. I paid for everything at checkout. After my younger sister hit the limit on her 5th credit card, I built a new debt repayment spreadsheet, laminating and color-coding it, because I honestly thought improved organization was all she lacked. She asked me to co-sign a lease on her behalf since her credit was somewhat damaged, and I agreed. Although I had to assure my bank that she was trustworthy as a tenant, that wasn't entirely true. My parents would praise me, calling me intelligent, dependable, and resilient, as if those were words of affirmation. Yet those labels always came with added duties instead of security. My mother once told me, "Kelsey's just not made like you. She requires more help," as if I came pre-equipped with extra reinforcements, and as if being resilient was a debt I owed them simply because I possessed it in greater supply. And whenever my younger sister started to unravel, I was the one they contacted. Never her support group, never the police, never her counselors, always me. The most recent time she relapsed, I picked her up from a gas station parking lot, wrapping her in my own jacket since hers had gone missing, somewhere between the casino and wherever she'd blacked out. I bundled her in my coat, heated up some soup for her, and stayed up all night to make sure she wouldn't have a seizure. And then 3 days later, she removed me as a friend on Connect Space. There was no argument, no explanation. She just disappeared. When I confronted her about it, she replied, "I just didn't want any judgment showing up in my feed right now." That was the moment I stopped offering help. It wasn't out of resentment or wounded pride, but because I realized I was just another item in her cycle. Ask for help, take, reset, and repeat. My parents never mentioned it or questioned why I had stopped checking in. I suspect they actually felt some relief. For them, it meant they didn't have to face the emptiness between us. It allowed them to keep assigning me the same part, the one who pays the bills, the one who always arrives, the one who never voices any complaints. I chose not to return the next morning. Not for Christmas stockings, not for warm cinnamon rolls, not for the brittle, splintered sound of my mother's voice in the early fives. Voicemails always started with, "Morgan, honey," and wrapped up with, "We didn't mean it like that." I ignored the collective chat message from my cousin, Andrew Boone, inquiring about what went on. I kept quiet instead of offering explanations, because how could I make anyone understand that this wasn't sudden, that it had been quietly building for years, that the dinner merely served as the point where the old story reached its end. I blocked my younger sister's number first, and after that, my mother, Diana Callahan, and then my father, William Morton, one after another, as if I were shutting down browser windows I should have closed long before. Initially, the quiet felt suffocating. The background racket, the turmoil, my younger sister's late-night texts had become my normal. "Can I borrow $400? My father's ongoing reminders about managing his mutual funds, my mother's guilt-heavy voicemails threaded with sighs and conditions. I had shaped my world around being their fallback escape, their safety net. And now, there was only silence, the sort that feels as if I had just stepped away from something in motion. The treadmill was still going. I was at a loss as to how to handle it. All I could do was stay motionless. Then 4 days after Christmas, my manager at Camden and Hunt called me into her office. She was composed and businesslike, the sort of person who only summoned me when something required taking care of. "There's a man," she explained, "who's been phoning the front desk again and again, insisting he's your father." The atmosphere seemed to change, and my hands turned clammy as she went on. "He left voice messages, accused me of turning my back on my family, and claimed I had a responsibility to my younger sister." Her tone was measured and impartial. "I'm not here to pass judgment, but this has to stay separate from work. Do you get that?" I nodded in response. I said I was sorry. I exited her office with my head buzzing. That evening, I blocked their home phone. Afterwards, I went through my contacts and blocked all their other backup numbers as well. By that point, it wasn't just about boundaries anymore. It was about protecting myself. Still, that day in my manager's office lingers in my mind. The expression on Jacqueline's face wasn't one of anger, but more of bewilderment, as though the idea of abandoning my family didn't fit with the employee who was always willing to work late and support the team members. Sometimes I find myself wondering how often that narrative, where I play the role of antagonist, was retold, and just how many people accepted it, especially since it originated from a man who once called me his greatest pride. That phone call arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A number I didn't recognize flashed on my screen. Part of me considered ignoring it, but a deep, anxious flutter in my chest wouldn't let me. It was the kind of dull pain I sensed before I even learned what had gone wrong. A nurse spoke, her tone steady and precise. "You're listed as Kelsey Lane's emergency contact. She's at St. Elora Medical Center. She's stable, but she was discovered unconscious in a parking lot. She told me my younger sister had no identification. Her phone was destroyed. Someone who had seen her at a shelter recognized her and reported it. I asked whether she would recover." The nurse paused. She was alert, but covered in severe bruises. I went there. Naturally, I did. Not out of obligation to old roles, but simply because I am not heartless. Walking into that St. Elora Medical Center, the St. Elora Medical Center room, felt like entering a chapter of my life I'd already left behind. My younger sister was present, slightly upright in the bed, arms mottled with yellow and purple, one eye puffed shut, bandages across her fingers. My mother sat next to her, gripping a tissue tightly, as if it were her final strand of meaning. When she noticed me, she murmured, "Thank God." I didn't respond. I remained at the end of the bed, hands buried in my jacket pockets, gazing at my younger sister, the one I had once driven across state borders to rescue, and I was utterly numb. There was no anger or sorrow, just a numbing stillness until my father entered the room. He didn't acknowledge my younger sister, nor did he speak to the nurse. He strode directly over to me, his posture rigid and his tone booming with intensity. "This is what happens when family fails to stand together," he declared. I gazed at my father, or perhaps right through him. My response was, "No. This is what happens when someone is enabled for so long that accountability becomes unrecognizable, when those who set limits are punished, instead of those who ignore them." My father's lips parted to speak. I turned away and exited the room. I made no attempt to hear whatever he might have said in return. After all, I already anticipated his response. Exactly 3 days later, an envelope arrived. There was no sender listed, just my full name in bold capital letters and the heavy official sound it made as it landed on the floor beneath my mail slot. Before I even tore it open, I already understood what was inside. I gazed at it for what felt like ages, sitting cross-legged in my hallway, the envelope resting on the tiles as if it were a silent warning. Eventually, I got up, took the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer without saying anything. 2 hours after that, I reached out to an attorney. His name was Brendan Ashcroft. In his early fives, soft-voiced, always with reading glasses on a chain, Brendan was known for specializing in cases about financial abuse within families. I handed over everything I had to my attorney. The screenshots, the cashew payment records, the collective chat messages, unauthorized bank withdrawals. I felt powerless to refuse. Emails with subject lines like "Urgent Kelsey again" and "Can you just cover it?" Color-coded spreadsheets, dated itemizations, a printed copy of the voicemail my father had left for me at Camden and Hunt, the one claiming I was morally obligated to take care of family. All of it formed a trail I couldn't ignore. Brendan paged through my binder in silence for a full 10 minutes. Then he glanced up at me and remarked, "You've already completed 80% of what's needed. This isn't just about defending yourself. This is an offensive strategy. We didn't just submit a motion for dismissal, we filed a counterclaim as well. Emotional harassment, manipulative financial abuse, and slander in the workplace were all included. We also provided witness statements from team members, including Lila Bennett from the front desk, who initially thought my father's call was a joke until he began shouting. Then I went even further. I formally requested a legal release from any upcoming financial responsibilities regarding my younger sister, citing emotional stress and providing medical proof from Dr. Marta Feld. Dr. Marta Feld compiled a comprehensive impact report on my finances, credit rating, and professional path. The initial hearing was scheduled for March 12th. My father was absent. At the second one, he showed up late, grumbling in a spotted polo shirt, complaining about treachery and thankless offspring. My mother waited in the corridor outside and never stepped inside. My younger sister arrived, wearing sunglasses and avoiding my eyes. She was accompanied by a man. He could have been her boyfriend, or simply someone else she had drawn into her sphere. The judge glanced over the evidence and declared, "There is no responsibility here. Not legally, not ethically. Case closed." In an instant, the balance of power shifted. There was no sense of victory. Instead, it was like breathing out after years of holding my breath. That evening, a letter arrived from my father, with a wax seal, the kind he used for invitations to birthdays or weddings. I chose not to open it either. Instead, I tucked the letter into the same drawer, acting not out of anger or fear, but with genuine calm. I had no intention of sharing it publicly. At least, that was my thought at first. But one evening, about a week after the Raven District Court had thrown out the case, I was lounging in my new place, scrolling without purpose, when I stumbled onto a discussion in collective chat. It was a group for adult children from toxic families. What was the final straw that led me to walk away? I read every single comment, each story sounding familiar, different people, the same pain. So, I decided to start my own post, giving it a simple, nondescript title. My family took legal action against me for not saving my younger sister. This is how I defended myself. I left out names and pictures, focusing only on facts. I relayed exactly what had happened: the Christmas dinner, the heavy quiet, the hospital, and then the legal action. I shared edited screenshots, organized timelines, and links to helpful organizations. My writing voice sounded as if I were teaching someone who still equates love with total selflessness. Finally, I pressed publish and shut my laptop. By the next morning, the post had racked up thousands of upvotes and hundreds of responses. Siblings tagging each other, gratitude from strangers, and messages like, "I assumed I was alone." One reply stuck in my mind. "Your experience made me feel allowed to ignore late-night phone calls. Thank you for that." But the surprising part arrived 3 days later. A direct message with no name, sent by a freelance writer. She explained that she was drafting an article about financial abuse within families and how adult children had begun to resist, sometimes through courts, sometimes publicly, sometimes in secrecy. She wanted to include my experience. There would be no names or photos, merely the facts. I agreed. The story exploded in popularity. By the end of the week, it appeared on the main page of 3 different sites. Naturally, anybody familiar with my entire situation would spot it for what it was: the lawsuit, St. Elora Medical Center, the voicemail left at Camden and Hunt. In the days after, my former landlord, George Harrow, messaged me. I read, "Saw that article. Wishing you well." That took courage. One of my team members left a sticky note on my workspace. "Just so you know, I believe you made the right choice." Afterward, a letter arrived. It was typed and formal. There was no sender listed, but my father's initials were pressed into the seal. I didn't read that one either. I just kept it tucked away. I studied my hand for a brief moment, noticing it was steady, neither anxious nor inquisitive, simply calm. Afterward, I placed it inside the same drawer where I kept the lawsuit envelope, positioning it right behind, as if they were consecutive chapters I had finished and no longer wished to revisit. The moment I pushed the drawer shut, I became aware of something. Perhaps quiet can serve as an answer all its own. Perhaps peace isn't something won. Perhaps it's something you take back. It had been 8 months. There were no phone calls, no emails, and nothing from Raven District Court, just quiet. I found myself falling into a daily routine that felt different and unfamiliar. My living space remained undisturbed. My phone rang only when there was a reason for it to ring. Occasionally, a few friends would stop by. Not a crowd, just enough people to replace tension with laughter. I believed at that point that things were finished. The dispute with Raven District Court was over. My family, including my mother and my father, had disappeared from contact, and I was done dwelling on the past. But then a message arrived, from a contact I didn't know. No pictures, no drawn-out explanation, just the awareness that you most likely despise me. I exist in a new state of mind these days. I have been working toward recovery for 8 months. I felt I needed to thank you for leaving. Your decision made me find my own strength. I regret all that happened. The message was from Lila. I gazed at the text for a good while. It wasn't because it caused me pain, but rather because it didn't affect me at all. There was a point in my life when those kinds of messages would have shattered me. They would have made me rush to call her back, try to patch things up, and fall back into the old patterns. But I was no longer the same. I had let go of anger. I no longer felt empty, only calmly balanced. I began to write a reply with careful consideration. I don't feel hatred toward you. I am thankful you're getting better. However, I cannot remain a figure in your life anymore. My words were genuine, not out of spite, but out of certainty. Lila never sent another message, just as I had anticipated. That night, I sat outside on my balcony, taking in the shimmering city lights below. And for the first time, I wasn't haunted by the memories of what I'd left. I didn't hear my father's voice accusing me of being ungrateful. My mother was silent as ever. Instead, I only heard the wind and the sound of my own breathing. It showed up on a Tuesday, a pale envelope neatly placed in my mailbox. There was no return address, but the initials on the flap made the sender clear: W.M., my father, William Morton. I paused, holding it, feeling its heaviness. It wasn't just the envelope, but the long years packed into it. The yelling during dinner, those steps outside Raven District Court, the thrown fists, the long silences. I didn't open it, not out of fear, but from a sense of calm. I left it on the kitchen counter before eventually slipping it into a hallway drawer, the one that's almost always closed. I didn't do it to conceal it, but as a quiet reminder to myself. Sometimes closure happens without any words at all. Other times, it's simply making the decision not to return. That weekend, I gathered up all of my previous documents, every note, screenshot, and voicemail, each one I had used in Raven District Court, each that I had once gripped like a shield. I scanned the items I needed to keep, then fed the physical copies through a shredder. Its sound was harsh, mechanical, and utterly final. I didn't shed a tear. I simply stared as the paper strips collected, tidy and slender, as though the past was dissolving into air. I changed apartments not much later. That old home had fulfilled its role, absorbing my hurt the way walls trap warmth. Yet I wanted someplace brighter, a spot with more sunlight, a space untouched by any voice raised in anger. I purchased a brand new sofa, choosing it for comfort rather than function, and placed it in front of a window that welcomed the early sun. That soon became my morning routine. I'd drink coffee at 8:05, seated in silence, sometimes reading, sometimes doing nothing at all, simply allowing the tranquility to envelop me. Comfort seemed to wrap itself around me. Several months afterward, I caught myself opening that same drawer again. It wasn't to reread the letter or for any particular reason. I just wanted to see inside. The envelope remained exactly where I had left it, untouched, the seams crisp and free of dust. As I cradled it in my hand, I realized there was no longer any longing, just a gentle wave of appreciation. I wasn't grateful for the events themselves, but instead for what never came to pass, for the sentences I chose to leave unread. The envelope found a new home in a small handcrafted wooden box I'd purchased at a local craft market. It was simple, free of any markings, and securely locked. I lifted that box onto the highest shelf. It wasn't out of necessity, but because I felt no need anymore. That item became the final thing I held on to. I didn't keep it out of anticipation or hope for the future, but so I could look back at the person I once was. Ever since then, things have been peaceful for me. Not flawless, but genuinely my own. There are still moments when I involuntarily tense up. People often say, "Would you mind if I request something from you?" However, I hesitate. I take a breath and wonder if this burden is truly meant for me. And when the answer is no, I simply let it go. In the end, silence reveals which things deserve my words and which are best met with quiet.